Hello, we're back again. Reading a short story by James Joyce called Araby from his collection of short stories, Dubliners. Last time that we were reading the text, we were going sort of through the literary analysis sort of framework. This is my little tree framework. And the last time we worked about setting. Setting is going to be the most important thing, is because you can either see how it's going to be important or not pretty quickly and decide if you need to move on to what we're going to do today, which is talking about character. Obviously, character is the driving force, or characters are the driving force behind a novel or a story. It might not necessarily be as such in things like a poem, because you might have a speaker whose voice is actually parodying or parroting the authors. But with a character, you know that they're being specifically constructed in a novel or a short story to serve a purpose that's might be something different than just speaking as the author. So when we're looking for character, there are a few different things you can look for. One of the easiest is to sort of think about it as a set list of things that you're looking for. So when we're looking at characters, a good thing to think about is the acronym STEAL. So each of these letters stands for something that you want to look for when you're looking at character. So the S is, what do they say? So what's the dialogue? T is, what do they think? So what choices do they make? Do they have any internal thoughts? Is there some kind of narration going on? Are they the narrator or are they not? If they are the narrator, then that's going to be all the more important. E, their effect on others. I know you might be like, should this be affect? It's all right for the purpose of the acronym. It's E, their effect on others. So what are their, how do they connect? How do they relate to other characters? What's their significance? Are they the protagonist? Do they serve as a foil or the opposite representation of the main character? Are they the one that is pushing the action, or is the conflict being done to them? What's their effect on other people? A is for their actions. How do they act? What do they literally do? How do they behave? And then L is how they look. So are there any physical descriptions? And sometimes there aren't, but how do they physically look? This can also, any of these can also be inferred as well. So like for look, you might infer something about the character that's not explicitly stated. So if they're a child, you could probably assume that they're going to be shorter, they're going to be smaller, things of that nature. So we're going to go ahead and pick up where we left off, reading Araby. And then we're going to think about that STEAL framework after we read through this section about what is going on with the way that the character is presented in the text. So as we're reading, I'm going to just highlight a few things that I noticed that are very specific about the character. So I'm not really paying attention to setting. I'm looking at how's the character thinking, how are they affecting others, how are they looking at the world. When we returned to the street, light from the kitchen windows had filled the areas. If my uncle was seen turning the corner, we hid in the shadow until we had seen him safely housed. Or if Mangan's sister came out on the doorstep to call her brother in to his tea, we watched her from our shadow peer up and down the street. We waited to see whether she would remain or go in, and if she remained, we left our shadow and walked up to Mangan's steps resignedly. She was waiting for us, her figure defined by the light from the half-open door. Her brother always teased her before he obeyed, and I stood by the railings looking at her. Her dress swung as she moved her body, and the soft rope of her hair tossed from side to side. So you'll notice, as I was annotating, something that I really looked at first was to highlight the verbs. So what I'm really doing is I'm highlighting action words here, because that's going to tell me some very easy things about the character, about how they affect others, and how they act. which are the easiest things to observe about a character. So what I'm noticing here is that they're hiding in the shadows, watching as people are going about their day, waiting to see if they're going to go in or not. And then if they stay out, they're going to leave their shadow and walk to them resigned where they're waiting. And then again, standing and looking. So we're not getting a lot of dialogue from the characters. We're not even getting a lot of action other than hiding, waiting, and watching. So that tells us a lot about the character, actually. If we're thinking about what they're saying nothing. What might that tell us about a character, especially we know they're a child? What does it tell us about a child who doesn't talk or doesn't talk very much? That reveals something about him. Then we're also thinking about their choices here. And we have the choice that we see. They're waiting to see if they go in or not. So what are they thinking? Well, if they go in, we'll stay out longer. Versus if they're staying on the step and waiting for us like Megan's sister does, then we'll go. So that tells us something about how they think. We also know that they have the effect that they have on other characters. The brother of Mangan, so Mangan, the brother of Megan, Mangan teases his sister before he obeys. But the character, the main character, just stays there and stands and looks. So just observes. So while the other characters are affecting each other, there's teasing, there's trying to obey. The main character so far, all we know is that they just stay and look. So what effect do they have on others? As of right now, nothing. They don't have anything to say. They have no effect on other characters. That's really interesting. What does it say about a child who is neither seen nor heard? And then, of course, we see their action, and then we don't really know what they look like yet, although we know that the character is a wise observer, and that this child is very observant about what other people look like. Okay, I'm going to clear the annotations and then go ahead and move to the next section. Oops, I don't know why I put it so close to the top. Okay, every morning, I lay on the floor in front of the parlor watching her door. Okay, so every morning they laid on the floor watching her door. The blind was pulled down to within an inch of the sash so that I could not be seen. When she came out on the doorstep, my heart leaped. I ran to the hall, seized my books, and followed her. I kept her brown figure always in my eye, and when we came near to the point in which our ways diverged, I quickened my pace and passed her. This happened morning after morning. I had never spoken to her except for a few casual words, yet her name was like a summons to all my foolish blood. Okay, we're getting a lot more about the character here. Every morning he would lay on the floor watching her door, and his heart would leap. He would run out and follow her, always keeping her in his eye until their paths diverged, and he would pass quickly. But he could feel her boiling up his blood, his foolish blood, he calls us. So what is it telling us about the character? Again, not speaking, a silent observer. And we're getting a lot of the inner thought here. So we're getting that this character is sort of obsessive. Morning after morning, he says he would lay on the floor and watch the door, but hide so he couldn't be seen. So purposely hiding from her, but always very attuned and acute to what she's doing. The effect on the other character, it seems to me as if she doesn't even know he's there. So he's not really affecting her, though obviously she is affecting him. He says that her name summons his foolish blood. He feels some sort of like racing in his chest when he sees her. He's infatuated with her. And then his behavior here is quite odd and obsessive. We sort of get this boyish, maybe puppy love even, that he's very intrigued with what she's doing and always keeps an eye to her. But we still don't really have a description of what he looks like, other than we know he's laying on the floor, he's running, and he has some sort of foolish blood about him. So let's go ahead and keep going. Oh wait, I forgot that's where I wanted to stop for today. Let's go back and let's think about the character. It's too much of a spoiler to keep reading. So let's think about the character. So what does the character say? Nothing. What might that tell us about a character that doesn't say anything? Everything we need to know about them comes through in what they're thinking and how they're observing. So we know that that's going to be more important. Okay, so what do they think? They're very observant, almost obsessive. Obsessive. They think between two choices of either wait or follow. And those are choices that are recurring over and over again. Even when he was outside playing with Mangan, he had those similar choices. And then when he's watching Mangan's sister, it's the same thing. He's waiting and then he follows. So it's the same recurrent choices that he's thinking. So he's torn between these two things always. So effect on others. Obviously, he feels some sort of emotional connection to Mangan's sister. Mangan's sister. He tells us that there's something in his blood, but really, does he have any effect on other characters? He himself is like a shadow. He's like the shadow that he waits in. He just sort of follows after people. He's not really affecting them. He himself is a shadow. So his actions, again, he's mostly this obsessive hiding. So he's hidden behind a curtain, but then when he sees the sister, he gathers his books, and then, oops, he follows her, a little creepily maybe, until he reaches the point where they're gonna diverge paths, and then he quickens to pass her. So he's very observant. He's, very very interested in what's going on around him, things like that. But it's very interesting that he doesn't want anyone to acknowledge him. He wants to observe and he wants to be aware of what's going on, but no one ever really engages with him. It's very interesting. And then how he looks, we don't really know. So we could only assume, because of the first section, that we know he's a boy, and he's probably quite young. He's still outside playing with his friends and not really so invested in anything like worrying about university or things like that. So we could assume he's probably relatively young, maybe upper elementary school, middle school. Of course, this is Ireland, so the school system works slightly different there. But when we're thinking about the characters, still, this just kind of helps us think about what they're like overall. And what I always say to my students is then you need to sort of come up with what's called an epithet, okay? An epithet is a Greek tradition of always using a short phrase or a few adjectives to describe characters whenever they are brought up. So instead of just saying the main character, the protagonist, or, if you actually know their name, saying their name, is to give them an epithet to remind the person that you're talking to what this character is like. So for instance, in the Odyssey, whenever the goddess Athena is mentioned, she's always called gray-eyed Athena. So every time you think about her, you think about these gray eyes. Well, what must it mean about a character if she has gray eyes? They're sort of cold, but if they're always referencing her eyes, it's probably because she's so wise. She can see. She has a coldness about her, but she's very wise and can see far and wide. She knows. She has a depth to her. So every time Athena is brought up, you're reminded of these traits about who she is as a character. You want to do the same thing when you're doing literary analysis. So how would we describe this character? I would say he's an observant shadow, an obsessive, obsessively lovesick, maybe. I don't know if it's going to be true yet, but it seems like he is. He's a very quiet, he's a quiet follower, He's an observant shadow, he's obsessively lovesick, and he's a quiet follower. So now, anytime I'm going to mention the protagonist, instead of just saying the boy, the main character, the boy's observant shadow, the obsessively lovesick main character, the protagonist as a quiet follower. Now, when you're talking about the character, it's like you've done a little bit more understanding about who they really are. Of course, the best thing to do is think about how the character is presented at the beginning of the text, and then look again and see how they're presented at the end of the text, and see if anything has changed. Because then what you can do is say, the boy who at first seemed to be an observant shadow later became whatever he will become. So that's where we're going to stop for today. And next time we'll come back and read a little bit more about this short story, see what other things we can do as we're analyzing.